New York Giants general manager Joe Schoen spoke to reporters at the Combine, and although he didn't say anything definitive, he may have dropped a few clues into what the upcoming weeks hold for the franchise. We'll talk about that next and more on today's Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of our written work. And as always, welcome on in to our Blue Crew community members, to our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. So happy to have you. All right, folks, Combine Week has kicked off. General Manager Joe Schoen was first up on the podium on Tuesday morning. So he spoke to reporters for about 15 minutes. Then he did a backroom session. And pretty much, as you can imagine, the main topic was all about the quarterback. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then in segment 2, we'll talk a little bit about the draft, where maybe Schoen might have dropped a hint or two as to what his thinking is. And then finally, we'll wrap things up with a few miscellaneous notes that don't fit into either category. So that's our plan for today. Again, welcome on into everyone. All right, let's get started. Joe Schoen, obviously, the hot topic. What are you doing at quarterback? Is it going to be Matthew Stafford? Is it going to be another trade? Is it going to be, the draft? What are you doing? And, anybody who was expecting Schoen to come right out and say, well, we're going to do A, B, C, and D, they were left disappointed. And it just wasn't going to happen. So, basically, Schoen was asked about Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams, and he deflected all the questions. He basically said, look, Stafford's under contract. You'd have to ask the Rams about his status. And of course, the Rams, their head coach and GM, don't attend the Combine. So nobody was able to ask them what they might be thinking. But hopefully, later this week, I'll have one of our Locked On Rams co-hosts on the show, maybe to give us a little insight as to what the Rams are thinking as far as Stafford goes. But anyway, Schoen primarily spoke about, when he did talk about the quarterback, he said that, they're leaving the options open, but he also said something kind of interesting. He talked about, I'm going to keep swinging until I get it right. And I found that comment kind of interesting because, when Schoen was hired in 2022, what did he swing at exactly? He inherited Daniel Jones. He and Brian Dable made the decision, probably, with some input from others in the building, to give Daniel Jones an opportunity, because Jones, remember, had been kind of, rocky up until that point. He had been through different systems, hadn't been able to really, set his feet on the ground. So they wanted, I think, to give Daniel Jones that opportunity to show what he could do. Plus, they also had the decision to make about the 50-year option, which, of course, the Giants turned down because they didn't know how he was going to work out. So that's for 2023. After the 2022 season, Jones has a great year. The Giants give him that big contract, that 4-year contract with a 2-year out, which, as I've been saying all along, folks, that was Shane's way of saying, well, I'm not really sure if this guy's my long-term answer, but there's no better option at this point. We're too low in the draft. We're, the free agency class wasn't very good that year. So we'll go with the lesser of the evils. Well, anyway, so here we are, 2025 offseason. Jones did not work out, as we all know. But the Giants really didn't, you could say they took a swing on the contract, but really the contract was kind of necessary given the circumstances back then. So now the Giants, they're really going to take their first swing. They did try last year to take the swing, but they never really, they struck out. They tried to trade up because they wanted Drake May. They tried to trade up because they wanted Jaden Daniels. That didn't all work out. So they did try to take a swing last year. Didn't work out. This year, they're in a little bit better position if they want to, take a swing, so to speak. So whether that swing becomes Stafford, which, by the way, I firmly believe, and nothing that was said by Shane, either on the podium or in the back room, has changed my mind about this. But I firmly believe that if Matthew Stafford becomes available by the Rams for trade, the Giants are going to be in the thick of things. Now, I don't, as I have said before, I don't want to see the Giants give up the number 3 overall pick in this draft. And I don't think they'll have to. I really don't. I know there's been some reports saying, well, the Rams are going to automatically want the 3rd overall pick in order to move Stafford. I don't think that's going to necessarily be the case. What I do think, based on, what Shane said and my own, deductive reasoning or sleuthing, whatever you want to call it, I would not be surprised if the Giants do acquire Stafford. And if they do, good on them. Now they don't have to consider trading up in the draft. They don't have to consider staying put at number 3 in the draft. So here's what I think the Giants will end up doing if they can work out a deal for Stafford. I think because Shane said that, hey, there are like 6 or 7 guys that we like in the top of the order. Hello. If that's not a sign that maybe the Giants are thinking about trading down, I don't know what else is. So I could see the Giants potentially, if they acquire Matthew Stafford, and we'll know, if that's going to happen probably next month once free agency starts and the new league year starts and teams are able to make trades and all that stuff. But if they acquire Stafford, if they have 6 or 7 guys that they like at the top of the draft board, guess what? Trade down. Go down to as low as 7 if you need to and pick up more picks. All right. So let's say, for example, Stafford will cost them at least a 2nd. All right. I'm just spitballing here. I don't know what the price is per se, but let's say it's the 2nd. If you trade down with a team that maybe wants one of the quarterbacks that might be still on the board, assuming one of them is on the board, now you can say, okay, you know what? We're going to recoup a 2nd round pick that we gave up for Stafford. Plus, we're going to potentially get a number 1 pick that we can use next year if we don't like this quarterback class enough to take one. So now we have set ourselves up to potentially be in a position come next year where we can trade up in the draft class in 2026, where it is expected the quarterback class will be a lot deeper than it is this year. So that's the scenario that I'm sticking with. Nothing that was said by Shane today kind of, changed my mind on that. Now, obviously, if the deal for Stafford doesn't work out, now I have to see what happens in free agency because they will get a veteran. Shane has said as much. And to that, I want to just point out, Shane kept talking about, quote unquote, right now, meaning, okay, we've got to find a guy who can win us some games. We feel that our offense is pretty well set, save for maybe a couple of spots and depth spots, but our offense is pretty well set to where we can compete. We have the resources to build up the defense, which is lacking in some spots. All we need is a quarterback. And I don't necessarily agree that with that premise that the Giants are 1 quarterback away. I don't agree with that. I think they're a little bit more than 1 quarterback away. But Shane seems to think that, if they get the quarterback situation correct, they will be in a better position to compete. And that may be true. I don't know that they'll necessarily catch the Eagles, but they'll certainly, I would think, win more than 3 games if they get the right quarterback in. So that all being said, they're going to take a swing at the quarterback, which they really, didn't start doing until last year, if you think about it, and just keep on doing it until they get it right. And here's the thing to remember, folks. Shane and Dable were both given a grace period by ownership. They have to win games in 2025. They can't use the excuse of, well, the quarterback class this year and the draft was garbage and we can't, we didn't have a chance or we didn't get this done or we didn't get that done. John Mara and Steve Tisch don't want to hear excuses. They want results. Now, ideally, they want a Super Bowl championship, but let's be realistic. That's probably not going to happen with the Giants. There's still a ways off. So take it step by step, get a veteran in here, which I believe was the plan all along. Even if you draft a rookie, let that kid sit. Look, everybody's saying, well, they can get a rookie in right away. Why do they have to acquire a veteran? Shane said they want a veteran to help groom a rookie, show him the ways of the NFL, how to prepare, how to take care of himself, how to study film, and all that good stuff. He said as much. Folks, this is the Eli Manning situation happening all over again. Remember in 2004, the Giants traded for Eli Manning. They brought him in. They had Kurt Warner, who was keeping the seat warm. Kurt Warner mentored Eli while he was here with the Giants in the beginning. And then midway through the season, they flipped the switch. They went from Warner to Eli. This is the history that I think the Giants are leaning on to repeat itself. And this is what I anticipate is what I think Joe Schoen wants to happen and what I think will happen if everything falls into place. So that's the story on the quarterback. Now, what about the draft? Did Joe Schoen give us any hints as to what he's thinking? He might very well have, and I'll tell you what they are right after this. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and it is Combine Week. The NFL Combine officially underway from Indianapolis. So Joe Schoen, the first up on the podium, has been his habit, if you will, or practice the last 3 years, 4 years that he's been the GM. No Brian Daboll, though. Brian Daboll is not going to speak at the Combine. We'll probably hear from Brian Daboll once we get to the NFL league meetings, which are next month. So you'll have to sit tight to find out what Brian Daboll might be thinking. Not that he's going to tell us anything, but we'll have to sit tight. But anyway, let's talk now about the draft. Joe Schoen, did he give a hint into his thinking? Now, I alluded to this a little bit in the last segment, but I'm going to go into it a little bit more detail. Joe Schoen mentioned that right now the team has about 6 or 7 guys that they like at the top of the draft. Their draft board is not necessarily set. And oh, by the way, I didn't mention this, but I found it kind of interesting that Shane also made a comment about, I haven't seen much of Cam Ward, the Miami quarterback. So I don't know if that's just him trying to throw everybody off the scent or what the story is there, but I found that comment kind of interesting. But anyway, if the Giants do have the, 6 or 7 guys that they like at the top of the first round, like I said, folks, that means I'm convinced they're going to trade down. I do not think the Giants are going to trade up for a quarterback. I know a lot of, some mock drafts have predicted that. I know some, media members have predicted that. I know fans have predicted that. I am not convinced the Giants are going to do that. Shane spoke about all the capital that they have, both in terms of financial resources and draft assets. Folks, this team, they have some holes to fill. All right. I do not see them trading away draft assets for one position. And as I've said before, if they do get the veteran quarterback, whether it's Stafford or maybe it's somebody else, who knows? If they get the guy that they feel can win them some games, why would they trade up? It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense this year. It makes more sense to trade back. And Shane's statement about having 6 or 7 guys that they like tells me that they're going to be a little bit more flexible to trade back. Now, of course, there's the better possibility that they stay put at 3, and take the best available on the board at the time. So, let's assume, and obviously I don't know how this is going to play out, but let's say the Titans take Cam Ward, who I think the Giants really like. I think they might like him a little bit better than Shedeur Sanders at this point. That doesn't mean it won't change, but that's just the impression I'm getting. Let's say that, Travis Hunter. No, let's say Abdul Carter goes off at the board at number 2. That leaves you with Travis Hunter. That leaves you with, Sanders, if you like him enough to, if he moves up your board. That leaves you with Johnson. the cornerback. That leaves you with Mason Graham, the defensive tackle. That leaves you with a bunch of options. You can't go wrong, I don't think, with any of those options. And I think if the Giants do stay put at number 3, if Cam Ward is not on the board, I would not be surprised if the Giants take a defensive player at number 3 overall. Just the feeling I'm getting, it's, just my connecting the dots, whether or not my picture turns out to be the accurate picture or if I missed a dot or two, that remains to be seen. But I think if the Giants stay at number 3, there is a very good chance that player is going to be a defensive player. The defense needs help. All right. We've talked about this on the show several times. Defensive line help. They need cornerback help. They could use another edge rusher. All right. They need help on the defensive side of the ball. And I would not be unhappy if they took a Travis Hunter or a Mason Graham in that spot, or if Abdul Carter falls down to them at number 3, I'd be thrilled if they got him. They need help on the defensive side of the ball. And I do think, as I've been saying on the show all along, that the Giants free agency, that money that they have right now, that cap space, it's going to go towards a quarterback and a cornerback. I would be shocked if the Giants do not spend on a veteran cornerback. I think that's going to help that young group back there, probably just as much as grabbing a Travis Hunter. And even if the Giants do spend on a veteran cornerback, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to skip out on Travis Hunter if he's sitting there. But it also gives some options to where if they want to grab, like I said, Mason Graham or a Kenneth Walker or, another guy who might be sitting there that's not a quarterback but is a defensive player, that doesn't, prevent them from doing it. So I just think that, that little nugget about Shane saying that there's 6 or 7 guys that they like at the top of the board, that was very telling because, a lot of, I've seen some draft analysts say that, they have 12 first round grades on players or, 10 first round grade players. The Giants are not going to exit out of the top 10. They're going to stay in the top 10, but trading down again does make some sense for the Giants if indeed the 6 or 7 guys that Shane says they like right now remain at the top of their board moving forward. So that's kind of how I see the draft playing out. Now, obviously, free agency is going to influence how things work out. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And it's going to be interesting to follow. So we'll see if that changes as they go forward. But that's the impressions I'm getting based on what Shane said. All right. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the rest of what Shane said, the key points of what he had to say. So please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Hey, Giant fans, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. The app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel, make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And it's combine. We've been waiting for this after the last couple of weeks, kind of had some downtime. But really, there's never really much downtime if we're talking the NFL. I mean, there's always something to cover, something to write about, something to talk about. So that's what we're doing. We're talking combine this week. And we're talking about what Joe Schoen, the Giants general manager, had to say at the combine on Tuesday. Just a few remaining miscellaneous thoughts from the GM. He was asked about Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence both guys who had season-ending injuries. Andrew Thomas, the Liz Frank sprain. Dexter Lawrence had the season-ending dislocated elbow. Lawrence is fine, folks. I mean, he was doing tug of war down at the Pro Bowl games, so he's pretty much, fine, I would say. And Shane said the same thing. He said he hadn't seen Dexter Lawrence, but because he was doing the tug of war, obviously, if he was that bad, he would not do tug of war with the bad elbow. As for Andrew Thomas, Thomas is progressing. He's out of the walking boot. They are optimistic. He's on schedule, should be ready. I don't know if he'll necessarily be ready for the spring. That wasn't the impression I got, but certainly he would be ready by training camp. Shane said that Thomas has been working out, looks humongous, I think was his word that he used. And he sounded very optimistic about Andrew Thomas returning. Now, please, let's keep Andrew Thomas healthy. That's another story. Now, speaking of Andrew Thomas and the offensive line, Shane talked a little bit about that. He said, look, we've got 4 of our 5 starters. The one hole that they have to address, obviously, right guard. So the question is, do they bring back Greg Van Roten? Assuming Van Roten wants to continue playing, that is, unless come back to be with the Giants. Do they go in another direction? All right. The interior offensive line class, not horrible, but not, I think, as deep as the tackle class. And if you're going to draft an offensive lineman, you probably want to get a tackle because the Giants just don't have a swing tackle on their roster. So that would probably be the way I would go. And as far as the right guard spot goes, are they going to have Jay Kubas, who is an undrafted free agent, compete with Joshua Azudu, who's, they're still trying to salvage him, a 3rd-round draft pick a couple of years ago. Evan Neal, who I still say is going to be a right guard candidate this year. Do they have a lead on the roster, or do they have to acquire a veteran free agent? Personally, I think what the Giants are going to do with that spot is they're going to get a free agent. No disrespect to Azudo, Neal, or Kubas, but again, this team, they got to win in 2025. They got to make sure that offensive line is as solid as can be. And look, I think they'll draft depth. They need depth on that offensive line. That was a big problem that got exposed last year, when the injuries started popping up. So I would not rule out adding depth. But look, if you're not going to, you don't want to mess around, all right? It's kind of like where they were last year when they took the veteran approach to build up that offensive line. I think that's the approach they're going to take this year with that right guard spot. I don't know necessarily who that person is going to be, but look, if you get a veteran in, then, where does that leave Evan Neal, the 1st-round pick from a few years ago? Leaves him as your potentially as your swing tackle. So if you don't draft an offensive tackle, maybe Evan Neal becomes that guy for this year, which is, quite the fall from grace, considering he was once the 7th overall draft pick a couple years ago. But it is what it is. That's how the cookie crumbles, as they say. So the offensive line, certainly something to keep an eye on, what the Giants do there. Shane also quickly talked about the quarterbacks. He was asked about the quarterbacks in the draft class not electing to not throw, specifically Cam Ward and Shador Sanders. He said he didn't have a problem with that. I don't see why anybody would. It's not like there's not tape on these guys. And, oh, by the way, they're going to throw at their pro days. So it's not a big deal if they don't throw at the combine, although some will argue that, it's a cop-out, leadership thing. I don't see it that way, guys. I really don't. So I don't think that will be an issue with them. So that's pretty much it from the combine. Day 1 of the combine. GMs and head coaches spoke. Joe Schoen was first up, as I mentioned. Now, the rest of the week, we're going to hear from the draft prospects. So if there's anybody of interest that happens to talk, mentions the Giants, we'll, of course, talk about it here on the show. Otherwise, we'll just bring you updates from the combine, any kind of observations. I'll try and have a couple guests on if I can get them. And we'll just keep rolling right along. as we now start to pick up. It's getting close to the draft. Pretty soon we'll be in March with the start of free agency. So that's exciting. And then before we know it, the draft will be here. So make sure you keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast. We're still 5 days a week, bringing you all things New York Giants. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition. As always, thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And I'll see you tomorrow.